Exploring abandoned places can be thrilling, right?
Keep going.
There's something about the eerie silence that draws you in.
What the hell?
But every so often, you stumble upon something so unsettling that it makes you wonder, what on earth happened here?
Jesus Christ.
Unless they kept humans in here.
Today, let's dive into the creepy abandoned lab where experiments never ended. Let's get started. 1. Homer Research Laboratory, Pennsylvania. Homer Research Labs, once the titan of steel testing, sprawled over 1,000 acres in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
That was a lot of noise.
Back in 1961, Bethlehem Steel Corp was flexing hard, launching the biggest facility of its kind. 8 buildings all dedicated to messing around with thermodynamics, metallurgy, and ceramics. You know, the heavy stuff that keeps buildings from collapsing. At its heyday, this place was swarming with 1,000 brainiacs, scientists, and tech wizards, all cooking up top-secret projects that beefed up steel like nobody's business. They even had this beast of a 500-ton press and a rare electron microscope to peek at atoms or whatever. In 1962, they dropped a cool $4 million on a new chemistry building, all to figure out how to stop steel from rusting into oblivion. But you know how it goes. The steel scene changed, and by 1986, Lehigh University took over, keeping the lights on until 2005. 2. Los Alamos National Laboratory, New Mexico, USA. Los Alamos National Lab in New Mexico.
Jesus Christ.
Oh, buddy, that place is like the Brainiac bunker of World War II, totally off the radar and stuffed with Nobel Prize legends like Enrico Fermi and Richard Feynman. Back in '43, under the watch of genius J. Robert Oppenheimer, this top-secret lab was all about cooking up the first nukes. And boy, did they deliver.
Flash of a light that man had only seen from the stars.
Few people laughed, few people cried, most people were silent.
They popped off the world's first atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in '45, flipping history on its head.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
The joint was chosen for its middle-of-nowhere vibe, crucial for keeping those big brain moves under wraps. Their masterpiece? The Trinity test in July '45, which was the grand debut of the nuclear age. Post-war, these guys didn't just kick back, they went all in on the hydrogen bomb in the '50s and kept leading the nuke game through the Cold War. Today, some of that old-school gear is retired, but Los Alamos, still the big leagues in nuclear research. 3. Amani Hill Research Station, Tanzania. The Amani Hill Research Station, tucked away in Tanzania's Usambara Mountains, was a big deal back in the day. It was especially famous for battling malaria since its start in 1902 during German rule. This place was the brainchild of science nerds who globally put it on the map. After World War II, the Brits took over, morphing it into the East African Malaria Unit in 1949. And oh boy, did they go hard on malaria research. By the 1950s, this joint was buzzing with over 100 researchers geeking out on malaria and other nasty bugs. They had the coolest labs packed with all the latest gear. But like all good things, it stumbled post-1970s. And now, it's pretty much a ghost lab.
There's an extinct piece of technology here, the payphone.
Walking in there is like stepping into a science time machine. Old tools, dusty data, and forgotten specimens everywhere.
That sounds like a chemical weapon.
Despite being off the radar now, the legacy of Amani's disease-fighting days still matters.
Unless they kept humans in here.
4. Harlan Laboratories, USA. In 1931, Harlan Laboratories burst onto the scene in Indianapolis, Indiana, ready to shake things up in the preclinical research game. This place wasn't just a lab, it was a breeding powerhouse, churning out all sorts of creatures. Rodents, rabbits, you name it, even primates, for the big shots in pharma, biotech, and chemicals. But Harlan wasn't just about pumping out animals. Their work was vital, from toxicology to genetic testing, helping to pave the way for new meds and safety tests. By the early 2000s, they were so big on the scene that they teamed up with Europe's bioexpert to up their breeding game even more.
What the hell?
Yet, not everything was squeaky clean. Harlan got slammed with accusations over animal welfare, real heavy stuff that sparked protests and legal drama. In 2015, Harlan merged with Huntington Life Sciences, and just like that, Envigo was born, closing a chapter on Harlan's controversial yet groundbreaking legacy. 5. The Nike missile sites, USA. You wouldn't believe it, but those old Nike missile sites were America's first line of defense during the chilliest part of the Cold War. Back in the 1950s, the US was pretty much setting up these bad boys called Project Nike to keep those Soviet bombers at bay. We're talking about a whopping 300 of these sites scattered all around, ready to launch missiles like the Nike Ajax and the even beefier Nike Hercules right into the sky.
Look at that.
These weren't just any missiles. The Hercules could even tote nuclear warheads and had a range of 100 miles. Each site was a trio of action: the integrated fire control area with all the high-tech radar, the launcher area hiding missiles underground, and the admin area keeping it all running smooth. But hey, as tech got better, these sites got the boot by the late 70s. Some got a makeover, while others are just eerie relics, hanging out and reminding us of those tense times. Like the Granite Nike base in Maryland, operational from 1954 to 1974, it was a real heavy hitter for the Baltimore-Washington defense line during those nerve-wracking Cold War years. 6. Fred Coulston's Lab, USA.
This place has been abandoned for years.
Fred Coulston was the mastermind behind one of the world's largest chimp labs, the Coulston Foundation, nestled in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Started in 1993 by this notorious toxicologist who famously swapped human prisoners for chimps in his dodgy tests, this place was no joke. Focusing on toxicology and preclinical drug tests, this lab tortured over 600 chimps and hundreds of monkeys with experiments meant for AIDS and hepatitis C research. By the late 90s, it had ballooned into the globe's top primate testing hellhole. Yet it wasn't long before the Grim Reaper came knocking. Between 93 and 2001, under shady circumstances, at least 48 primates kicked the bucket, thanks to abysmal care. The feds stepped in, yanking funding after catching wind of the horror show, leading to Coulston's shutdown in 2002. Those poor chimps, rescued and shipped off to a Florida care center, putting an end to Coulston's reign of terror. 7. The Rocky Flats plant in Colorado. Oh, the Rocky Flats plant in Colorado. That place was like the secret superhero lair of the US during the Cold War, only for crafting plutonium pits, the heart of nuclear bombs, not saving the world. Kicked off in 1952 and tucked away about 15 miles from Denver, this joint was no joke, sprawling over 11 square miles with a tight security belt to keep things hush-hush. But hold up, it wasn't all smooth sailing. In 1969, a massive plutonium fire turned the place into a hot mess, marking it as one of the worst industrial disasters stateside. Fast forward to the 70s and 80s, and bam, toxic levels of plutonium are popping up everywhere, sparking health scares and a ton of legal drama. The end came in 1989, when the feds busted in, and Rockwell International, the big bosses running the show, had to plead guilty to messing up big time. Cleanup kicked off in the mid-90s, wrapped up by 2005, and now most of Rocky Flats is a wildlife hangout, but some corners are forever off-limits. 8. The Georgia Nuclear Aircraft Laboratory, GNAL. The Georgia Nuclear Aircraft Laboratory, GNAL, in Dawsonville, Georgia, was the Cold War hotspot from 1951 to 1971. Dreamed up by the U.S. Air Force, Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, and the Atomic Energy Commission, they were all about making a nuclear-powered aircraft fly. This wasn't just any lab, folks. It was the only one in the U.S. set up to blast materials, gear, and the environment with open-air nuclear fireworks to see what would stick. They dangled an unshielded nuclear reactor between steel towers like some kind of radioactive puppet show, zapping everything in sight. Their experiments, wild. They zapped superconductors, turned regular wood into lockwood for fancy floors at the Atomic Energy Commission's digs, and tested how military stuff held up under a nuclear glare. But by 1961, they called it quits on the nuclear plane dream. There was too much glow for the go. Now, the place is pretty much a ghost town, with some leftovers, like a hot cell building and creepy tunnels. Shut down in '71. GNAL's glory days of nuclear hijinks are long gone. 9. Jackson Laboratory, USA. The legendary Jackson Laboratory. This old-timer's tale starts back in 1929 in Bar Harbor, Maine. Founded by the visionary Clarence Cook Little and bankrolled by big shots like Roscoe B. Jackson and Edsel Ford, this place was set to revolutionize biomedical research. Yeah, it was about to hit the skids thanks to the Great Depression, but it didn't just survive, it became a powerhouse in cancer genetics and mammalian genetics. Then 1947, a massive blaze torched the lab, wiping out nearly all their prized mouse strains. But did that stop them? Nope. The science squad worldwide sent cash and critters, helping Jax bounce back on its feet and keep on breaking ground. Fast forward, and these brainiacs have been mapping mammary tumor genetics since 1933, diving into stem cells and even chipping into the Human Genome Project. Parts of the old digs are ghostly shells now, but man, the stories they could tell about the mice that roared in cancer research. 10. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, Massachusetts, USA. In 1940, MIT decided they needed to whip up something wild for Lobbity-Woody, and bam, the Rad Lab was born. Don't let the name fool you. This wasn't some nuclear playground. Nope, it was all about radar magic, zapping microwave radiation into cutting-edge tech that seriously leveled up the Allied game. At its heyday, this lab was bursting with over 4,000 brainiacs, cranking out radars left and right, like 100 different systems worth a whopping $1.5 billion. One of their amazing creations, the SCR-584 radar. This bad boy transformed how anti-aircraft firearms did their thing, making them insanely accurate. Fast forward to 1945, and it's lights out for the Rad Lab. But here's the kicker. Their work didn't just help crush the war. It paved the way for the stuff we're glued to today in communications and defense. 11. The Pyramid Laboratory in Nepal. Up in the clouds near Mount Everest, the Pyramid Laboratory stands at a jaw-dropping 16,568 feet, making it one of the loftiest labs on the planet. Kicked off in 1990 by Nepal and Italy, this high-altitude brain hub was meant to tackle the big questions on climate change, biodiversity, and how humans hack it in extreme spots. Its quirky pyramid shape isn't just for show. It's stuffed with gear that's backed over 520 science missions. Originally, this sky-high lab kept an eagle eye on atmospheric filth and its nasty handshake with the Himalayas, including the glaciers. But cash troubles post-2010 hit hard, leaving the lab nearly in the dust with just one lone wolf keeping the lights on by 2022 and the tech getting rusty without upkeep. 12. Sloan Kettering Institute, USA. In 1945, the heavyweights Alfred P. Sloan and Charles F. Kettering threw down big bucks to launch the Sloan Kettering Institute in NYC. Their mission? To knock out cancer. And boy, did they pack a punch with pioneering chemo treatments that flipped cancer care on its head in the 1950s. But behind those shiny achievements, there was some serious shady business. The Institute's very own Dr. Chester Southam was playing mad scientist, secretly injecting unsuspecting patients with live cancer cells. This guy's wild experiments sparked a major scandal, blowing up with public outrage and a truckload of ethical headaches. Despite the dark days, SGI still played a champ's role in pushing forward cancer research, leading the charge on both chemotherapy and immunotherapy. And while some parts of the old lab have been tossed aside or switched up, the legacy of Sky, part groundbreaking, part cautionary tale, keeps on living. 13. The White Alice Communications System, WACS, in Alaska. The White Alice Communications System, WACS, in Alaska was like the backbone of Cold War communications. Set up in the 50s, this beast of a network was all about keeping tabs on Soviet shenanigans, using some serious tropospheric scatter tech to bounce signals way beyond the horizon. Spanning 71 stations with giant dishes across Alaska's wild terrain, the project was no joke. It started at $30 million and skyrocketed to a whopping $300 million operational. Through the 1970s, WACS was eventually sidelined by slick satellite tech, shutting down for good in 1985. Cleanup is still a headache thanks to old fuel spills and PCB messes. 14. The Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, SLAC, California, USA. SELAC National Accelerator Laboratory. Sitting pretty in Menlo Park since 1962, has been zapping electrons like nobody's business. It's not just any lab, it's home to the world's first 2-mile-long electron highway that could push these bad boys to a wild 30 billion volts. Back in the groovy 60s, this monster of a machine blew minds by showing that protons are packed with even tinier critters called quarks. Thanks to these findings, the nerds at SELAC bagged themselves a few Nobel Prizes as they helped piece together the jigsaw puzzle of the standard model of particle physics. Fast forward, and SLAC is not just about smacking electrons anymore. They went bigger with gadgets like SPEAR and PEP, uncovering new particles and dabbling in the mysteries of nuclear forces. And talk about upgrades. By 2009, they switched gears to photon science with the world's first hard X-ray laser, the LCLS. Though parts of the old accelerator are gathering dust, SLAC is still a heavyweight in the science ring, making it a legend in particle physics and photon science. 15. Alamogordo Primate Facility, New Mexico, USA. The Alamogordo Primate Facility, APF, in New Mexico, originally part of Holloman Air Force Base's gritty experiments since the 1950s, took the cake for pushing boundaries. This place wasn't just testing rockets. They were strapping young chimps, like Ham and Enos, later space celebrities, into rigs for bone-rattling speed tests and shocking electric studies that would make your hair stand on end.
A controversial primate facility in Alamogordo has animal rights activists stirred up again.
By the 1970s, APF shifted gears to the dark side of biomedical research, renting out its chimps for a barrage of invasive tests on nasty diseases like hepatitis and HIV. Come 2011, the bigwigs at the National Institutes of Health, NIH, got a wake-up call from the Institute of Medicine and finally slammed the brakes on these mad science stunts, turning APF into a retirement home for old, worn-out chimps who had seen better days. Yet, controversy stuck like a bad smell. Legal dramas and debates on why these old-timers couldn't just kick back at a sanctuary just kept rolling in well into the 2020s. 16. The Maunsell Sea Forts, England. Those Manzil sea forts, those hulking metal beasts out in the Thames and Mersey estuaries, were more than just relics. Originally crafted by the brainy Guy Manzil during the war to keep those German planes and ships at bay, these forts did their bit, blasting enemies and snagging mines from the sky and sea. But that's old news. Post-war, that's when the real weirdness began. They turned these abandoned giants into mad science labs, radar experiments in the Cold War chill, no less. Out there in the middle of nowhere, they were perfect for messing around with all sorts of signals without pesky interference. And the science didn't stop there. Marine biology geeks got their time too, poking around the waters for pollution effects and spying on fish. Not to mention, they were handy perches for peeping at ships and playing with long-range comms gear. 17. Lawrence Livermore, National Laboratory, California, USA. Lawrence Livermore, National Laboratory, isn't your average science lab. It's a heavyweight champion from the Cold War era, born in 1952 in California. Cooked up by brainy guys, Ernest O. Lawrence and Edward Teller, it started as part of the University of California's Radiation Lab in Berkeley before going solo. LLNL was all about pushing the envelope in nuclear weapons tech, making big waves with the development of the Polaris missile warhead, a real game-changer that kept the US in a strong position during those tense times. In the 1980s, the lab wasn't just kicking back, it was deep in the Strategic Defense Initiative, aka President Reagan's Star Wars program, tinkering with stuff like the X-ray laser. Fast forward to today, and while LLNL has shifted some gears with decommissioned sites, it's still cranking out innovations in fusion energy and supercomputing. 18. Tesla's Wardenclyffe Laboratory, New York. Tesla's big dream at Wardenclyffe, New York was a wild ride that never really took off. From 1901 to 1905, Tesla was all geared up to revolutionize how the world handles energy and communication. He had this crazy idea to zap electricity and information across the planet using the Earth itself. No wires needed. Center stage was this monstrous 187-foot tower built to pull off these insane experiments. But even with a hefty $150,000 thrown in by J.P. Morgan, that's like $5.5 million today, cash ran dry real quick. Tesla was dreaming bigger than his wallet could handle. And with Marconi already playing tunes across the Atlantic since 1901, investors were not vibing with Tesla's futuristic beats. By 1905, it was game over. The project tanked, the tower got knocked down in 1917 to scrape together some cash, and what was left turned into a ghostly factory. 19. Thomas Edison's Invention Factory, New Jersey. Thomas Edison's Invention Factory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, was the world's first R&D sweatshop. This place kicked off in 1876 and was Edison's playground, where he developed the phonograph in 1877 and the game-changing light bulb in 1879, earning him the cool title, the Wizard of Menlo Park. Edison promised a new gadget every 6 weeks and a blockbuster every 6 months. By 1878, his crew ballooned to about 25 hard-working guys, busting out over 400 patents. This spot was a magnet for globetrotters itching to peep Edison's latest brainchildren. But hey, as the stakes got higher, Edison upped and moved to a bigger joint in West Orange, New Jersey. In 1887, Old Menlo Park, it got the cold shoulder, turning into a ghost of its former genius self. Yet its legend as the mother of modern R&D still dazzles. That wraps up today's exploration, everyone. What are your thoughts? Which part of the abandoned lab's eerie history left you the most unsettled? Share your reactions in the comments below. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more chilling stories and discoveries in the future.